You are about to hear a story that has been told over 150 years, but has never been solved. In the comments, let me know which place you're interested in. Today, we're going to look into the Missouri mountains to find the darkest secrets. It was fall 1865, not long after the American Civil War ended. Missouri was still hurting from the war, and the Ozarks seemed like a world away. There, families lived alone in the middle of miles of thick forest and deep valleys. Where in this wild area? A family lived in the woods where the sounds of axes cutting wood were lost in the centuries-old trees. They would never have thought that they would become the main characters in one of the most bizarre mysteries ever recorded in Webster County. The Ashcroft family had moved to a large farm in the middle of nowhere, about 25 miles from Springfield, the nearest town. Thomas Ashcroft, who was 42 years old, built his log house in 1858. He brought his 36-year-old wife Sarah and their 3 kids, Mary Lou, 17, James, 14, and little John. She is only 9 years old. As you looked out over the property, you could see oak and hickory trees and a clear stream running through it. Thomas raised a few cattle and planted enough corn to feed his family during the long Ozark winters. The few people who lived nearby said that Mary Lou Ashcroft was a stunningly beautiful young woman. Her brown hair sparkled like copper in the sun, and her green eyes seemed to reflect the forest around her. She was all ready, acted in a mature way that impressed the few tourists who came through the property. Mary Lou was different from many other young women in the area because her mother had taught her to read and write before she got married. For a girl from the mountains, this was an odd way to grow up. It made her stand out in the small Ozarks town. In the summer of 1865, strange stories started going around the area. People traveling said they saw strange lights in the woods near the Ashcroft's land, always between midnight and early morning. Some people said they heard chants in the hills. Voices of women speaking a language that no one could understand seemed to be calling out to someone. People who were very superstitious talked about old native stories about ghosts that lived in the limestone caves all over the area. The realistic and busy Thomas Ashcroft thought these stories were just the thoughts of people who didn't have anything better to do. He had more. There are real issues to resolve. Because it rained so much, the corn crop was pushed back, and winter was coming quickly. When it came to Sarah, she couldn't hide how uneasy she was feeling. In the last few weeks of summer, she had seen Mary Lou's behavior change in small ways. Her daughter had changed. She used to be happy and chatty, but now she was quiet and spent hours walking alone in the forest. On one of these walks by herself, Mary Lou found something that would change her life forever. Change what will happen to the Ashcroft family. She found something hidden just below a pile of wet leaves on a September afternoon while she was gathering nuts near the creek. It was a metal medallion with strange symbols on it that she had never seen before. The item appeared to be very old, with rusty spots that suggested it had been hidden for decades or even centuries. When Mary Lou carefully cleaned the locket, she found that it could be opened and that inside was a small portrait of a young woman with delicate features and an unhappy smile. Sarah had a strong response when Mary Lou told her parents about what she had found. It looked like the woman had seen a ghost because she turned pale. She shook her hands while holding the charm and spoke in a low voice that no one could understand. Thomas was worried as he watched his wife. He had never seen Sarah respond so strongly to something. Sarah just shook her head when asked what she thought and said that the medallion should be put back where it was, found right away. Mary Lou, on the other hand, felt a strange pull towards the thing. She hid it under her pillow for a few nights and looked at the symbols carved into it by candlelight. She felt like she knew those drawings from old dreams because they looked like them. The pictures and letters seemed to be writing a story, one that she had to slowly figure out, word by word and picture by picture. After the locket was found, nights in the Ozarks were different. There were words in the trees that the wind carried, calls, and Marilou was often awake before dawn, wanting to walk through the woods for no reason. It felt like an unseen force was pulling on her, and she couldn't fully fight it or understand it. The first clues that something bad was going on with Mary Lou showed up in the third week of September 1865. One morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of bare feet on the wooden porch. As she got closer to the window, she saw the outline of her daughter walking into the forest in just the... She was wearing a white nightgown, and her hair was loose and moving in the cold wind of dawn. What was most scary was that Marilou looked like she was talking to someone because she was making gestures and reacting to voices that she alone could hear. Thomas was woken up right away, and he and his daughter ran after her. They found her standing in the middle of a clearing about 300 yards from the house. Her bare feet were stuck in the wet ground, and she was staring intensely at one of the many old limestone caves in the area. Mary Lou slowly turned around when they called her. What her parents saw shocked them. The young woman's eyes were totally white, and only the scarier part could be seen. She spoke in a language that neither of them knew, using words that sounded old and sad. They had to work for almost an hour to get her back to normal. When Mary Lou finally looked at her parents, she couldn't remember what had happened. She only remembered going to sleep regularly and being cold and confused when she woke up in the forest. Sarah saw that the plants around where her daughter had stopped were dying, like something had sucked their life away at night. Over the next few days, more and more episodes like this started to happen. Mary Lou would get up in the middle of the night and never be seen again. She was always found in the same area, in the same position, and speaking a language that no one could understand. Thomas was desperate to figure out what was going on, so he started to watch his daughter at night. What he found shocked and upset him deeply. There were other people with Mary Lou during these late-night events. There were answers. Sound waves from deep inside the cave seemed to come from whispering voices that came from the ground. Among the sounds, Thomas said he could tell were at least 3 different women speaking the same old language that his daughter had started to use. What scared me the most was that these sounds seemed to be teaching Mary Lou something, like she needed to learn it. More and more, Sarah felt hopeless and chose to ask for help. Minerva Collins, an old woman who lived about 5 miles away and was known in the area for her knowledge of healing herbs and old Ozark stories, was the next-door neighbor. Minerva was more than 70 years old. He had come to the area with the first white settlers when he was a kid. People didn't remember the tales that she knew about. They were told by the Oj Indians before they were forced to leave these lands. When Sarah talked about Mary Lou's symptoms, an angry look came over Minerva's face. The old woman asked to see the locket that the young woman had found. When Sarah showed it to her, Minerva jumped back as if she had been bitten by a snake. She knew what the symbols on the silver meant. They were very old marks, much older than anything that white people brought to the area. The first people to live on these lands left these marks. They were women who had suddenly disappeared decades before the first European explorers came. She told Sarah a story. The story came from her grandfather, who got it from an Oj-speaking fur dealer. In these caves, there was a group of women living together long before the white people came. They healed people and kept secret old information about stars, plants, and natural forces that most people couldn't understand. But something was wrong. These women started to go missing one by one, and it always happened on nights of the new moon. The last signs of them were found spread out, all over the forest. Things like clothes, tools, and jewelry, like the locket that Mary Lou found. Minerva's story told what the medallion's patterns meant. Not only did they look nice, but they also served as a kind of map that showed exactly where in the caves the ancient women had hidden their most sacred information. The locket was a key that opened the door to these hidden secrets. He did say, though, that this information would cost them a lot. In order to find out about the missing women, anyone was willing to take a big chance, having the same end. Sarah felt sad when she got home, but she was determined to save her baby. She hid the locket in a locked chest in the attic, hoping that being away from it would break the strange connection Mary Lou had formed with it. The plan seemed to work for a few nights. Mary Lou slept soundly and didn't have any sleepwalking or talking to sounds in her head, but the peace only lasted a week. Thomas woke up early on October 1st, 1999, to the sound of wood being cut, broken. He ran to the attic and saw that the trunk was open and the lock had been ripped off by a force that seemed too strong for a person. It was no longer there, and Mary Lou wasn't in her bed. They found her this time in the clearing. She had the object to her chest and was smiling in a way they had never seen her smile before. And that smile wasn't from his daughter. It was from someone much older and much more dangerous. The smile Mary Lou wore that early October morning was just the start of a change that would leave her. A family in total misery. The 17-year-old seemed to change into a totally different person over the next few days. His voice changed. It became deeper and more rhythmic, as if he thought about every word before he spoke it. She started to show that she knew things she had never learned. For example, she talked about medical plants so clearly that even Minerva Collins would be impressed. Thomas became more and more horrified as his daughter pointed out rare flowers on her walks and talked about how they could help her. Properties in a way that someone her age and level of experience could not. Mary Lou knew where to find roots that only bloomed every 7 years. She also knew exactly when to gather each plant to get the most out of it. Finally, she talked about how different combinations of ingredients could cure diseases or have much darker effects when mixed in different amounts. Mary Lou had started to have visitors, not real people that she could only see and talk to for long periods of time. This was the most upsetting thing that happened to her. Sarah often found her, being loudly excited while sitting on the porch and answering questions that no one else could hear. When asked about these talks, Mary Lou said she was learning from the old guardians, who were the women who had lived in these lands before any white family moved there. It was during one of these one-sided talks that Mary Lou said something that made her parents very angry. She said that she had been picked to carry on the work of the ancient guardians. The medallion wasn't found by chance. It was part of a plan that had been in the works for decades. The voices told her she had a special talent. She could connect the live world with the secrets of the missing women. With his strong Protestant faith, Thomas tried to persuade his daughter that these sounds were actually temptations from the devil, and that she should fight them and return to Christian teachings. But Mary Lou only smiled with that weird look on her face. That had become her trademark, and she carefully explained that the ancient guardians' knowledge was not tied to any one faith. The holy books didn't even dare to talk about the things they knew about life and death. In order to make her point, Mary Lou did a show that shocked the whole family. A few days before, James, the 14-year-old brother, hurt himself badly when he cut his leg with an axe while helping his dad cut wood. Sarah saw that the cut was red, swollen, and infected, was afraid for her son's life. Mary Lou went up to her hurt brother, put her hands on the cut that was getting infected, and started to mumble words in an old language that no one could understand. What happened next couldn't be explained logically. The family stayed quiet for the next 15 minutes and watched as the infection went away right in front of their eyes. The cut started to close at an impossible-to-believe rate as the redness and swelling went down. By the time Mary Lou finally caught her, it was impossible to tell where the axe had cut James' leg because it was so healed. Sarah broke down in tears because she was torn between being thankful that her son had miraculously healed and being scared of what her daughter was turning into. Thomas didn't say a word for hours because he was having a hard time figuring out how to balance his Christian faith with what he had seen. He couldn't say bad things about something that saved his son's life, right? How could he call bad a power that healed everyone so completely? But Mary Lou wasn't done with her yet. Demonstrations. She began to show other parts of the knowledge she had gained over the next few nights. She could tell what the weather would be like days in advance, tell when an animal was sick before it showed any signs, and knew more about the stars and the moon cycles than any astronomer at the time. During a very bright dawn, she took her family outside and pointed to the stars, telling them that ancient guards used the movements of the stars to figure out the best times to do things for their ceremonies that heal. At that point, Marilou told them the real reason for her change. The guardians from long ago had not just vanished. They were killed because people were scared and didn't know what to do. The first people to live in the area were scared of the women's powers, so they set out on a planned hunt to kill them all one by one until only their spirits were left, locked up in the caves where they had kept their most important knowledge. Marilou said that these ghosts had been waiting for decades until someone good found the locket and showed they could carry on their lessons. She was picked because she could learn new things and was brave enough to take on tasks that most people would think were too dangerous. The answer Mary Lou gave Thomas when he asked her what that duty was made the night air feel even colder. She told her that she had to finish the job that the ancient guards had started and gather all the information that was spread out in different places, different holes in the area, and keep them safe for future generations. But to do that, she would have to go on a dangerous journey deep into the caves where the guards' spirits were waiting for her. The Ashcroft family stayed awake all night because they knew deep down that their daughter was about to start a road that she might not be able to return from. Sarah held Mary Lou's hand and tried to remember every feature of her daughter's face. Thomas, meanwhile, fought the feeling of dread that he had, was going to lose the happy young woman he had raised with so much love for good. Mary Lou didn't decide on the spot to check out the caves. In the first few days of October 1865, she studied the locket for hours, almost obsessively, tracing the symbols on it with her fingers while mumbling spells in an old language she had learned. Sarah became more and more uneasy as she watched these practices because her daughter seemed to be going into deeper and deeper trance states while staying the same. She didn't move for hours while her eyes moved quickly, as if they were reading something in the air that wasn't there. Marilou found out something during one of these trances that would totally change how she saw what was going on. They were more than just a map of the caves on the pendant. They also had detailed advice on how to find your way through the underground passages that went for miles below the Ozarks' surface. The ancient guards had made a complicated system of markings and hints, a path that could only be seen by someone who knew what they were doing. Thomas still wasn't sure how to keep his daughter safe, so he suggested that the whole family go exploring in the caves. But Mary Lou calmly told them that it was not possible. After being persecuted and killed for decades, the ancient guards' spirits were very wary. They would only show themselves to someone who had full faith in what they taught and was ready to make a sacrifice. The journey by themselves, with only faith in the information the medallion gave them. In the early hours of October 15th, Mary Lou told everyone that it was time for her to go down into the caves. She had been in deep meditation the night before and talked to the spirits who were guiding her. They gave her clear directions on what to do. The girl told them that the trip would last 3 days and nights, and that she would not be able to talk to anyone else. If you try to follow her or get in the way of the process, bad things could happen to her and her family as a whole. Sarah begged her daughter to change her mind and offered to take her to see a doctor, a minister, or anyone else who might be able to help Mary Lou get rid of the supernatural force that was holding her. The young woman just smiled, and her strange, calm face became her most noticeable feature. She also said there was nothing wrong with her. Instead, she had finally found her true love, a reason for living. Mary Lou was shy when her younger sister Elizabeth, who was only 9, asked her if she could come home. Everyone in the family felt their hearts tighten when they heard the young woman's carefully considered answer, which was full of sadness. She said she would come back, but she might not be the same person when she did. It was impossible for the old guardian's knowledge to stay with a person, and she couldn't promise that she would stay the same person they saw her as. Loved and knew. In the afternoon of that day, Mary Lou started getting ready for the trip. The only things she packed in her small bag were a few slices of bread, a water bottle, candles, and a rope. The medallion she wore around her neck was more important to her than anything else she had. She would keep it there while she explored the caves. The words of the guardians from long ago made this clear. She should always have the ring touching her skin, so that they could still talk to each other between worlds. Just as the sun was going down, Mary Lou hugged each member of her family so tightly that she seemed to want to remember those times forever. She whispered loving and thankful words and asked for forgiveness for any pain her change had caused. He felt like he was saying goodbye to someone who was going to war and might not come back. Thomas held his daughter in his arms. How to get into the cave that Mary Lou knew about. The chosen spot was about a mile from the house and was hidden by ivy and rocks that looked like they were put on purpose to hide the opening. During her earlier walks, she had found this entrance by listening to the spirits' whispered instructions. They had led her through a winding path that avoided the area's most famous caves. Mary Lou shook a little as she walked toward the door. She was scared and excited at the same time. What he heard in his head. It seemed like the guards' spirits were eager to finally share the secrets they had kept for so long as things had become clearer and more urgent. With each step, she could feel their presence growing stronger. It was like an invisible force was making the air around her vibrate with the new ideas that hadn't been thought of yet. Thomas's last sight of his daughter was her outline going into the cave's darkness. For a few seconds, a candle's faint light flickered before it was lost in the ground. The quiet that. The sound that followed was so deep that it seemed to have its own weight, and there was such a strange silence that even the animals that normally make noise at night stopped. The Ashcroft family stayed awake for a few hours, sitting on the porch of their house and looking toward where Mary Lou had gone missing. Sarah spoke out loud as she counted the hours, as if keeping track of the time would help her daughter get back safely faster. Thomas paced back and forth as he fought the urge to run to the. It would be very dangerous to cave and push Mary Lou to come back, but you should not do that. The first night after Mary Lou went missing in the caves would be a turning point for the Ashcroft family. Thomas, Sarah, James, and little Elizabeth stayed awake all night, each thinking about their own fears and dreams. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, they heard noises coming from the cave's direction. Echoes in the distance that sounded like songs or laments, female voices, that mixed into sounds that were hard to pin down. Sarah was the first person to figure out that these sounds were not happening by chance. Every 15 or 20 minutes there was a pattern or rhythm that kept happening, as if it were part of a complicated rite going on deep in the earth. At the same time, the songs were both beautiful and scary. They were filled with a sadness that made people cry without meaning to. Thomas tried to tell his family that the sounds were just wind noises. People were going through the tunnels, but everyone knew that the sounds were coming from people or something that used to be a person. On the second day, there were no sounds at all, and the quiet was even scarier than the strange chants. Since there was no sound coming from the cave's direction, it felt empty, like that part of the forest had been taken out of reality. James went to the mouth of the cave where Mary Lou had gone missing. but all he found was a solid wall. It was so dark and cold that his breath made clouds of steam even in the middle of October. Manu Collins was the first person to bring up a tip about what might be going on in the caves. The old woman came to the Ashcroft's house in the afternoon of the second day with an old book she had been hiding for many years. His grandpa had bought the book from a French merchant who said he had lived with the Osage Indians during his first few years in America. Decades in the area. The yellowed pages had pictures and thorough explanations of the rituals that the ancient guardians did. The book says that the women who lived in these caves were not only healers, but also keepers of information who linked our world to other worlds that most people didn't even know existed. They had figured out how to talk to ghosts from other times to get to family memories that held secrets about the basic. How life and death work. In order to become a new guardian, the candidate had to spend 3 days and nights alone in the cave's deepest chambers. There, she was expected to face visions and tasks that would test her courage and her sanity. Minerva said that not all women who tried to become guardians made it through the process. Some people came out of the caves totally changed and with superpowers, while others were never seen again. The book talked about. There have been cases of candidates who went deep into the earth and then disappeared, as if they had been swallowed into it. In other cases, women came back from caves, but they were not quite human anymore. They had changed into something in between the living and the dead. Minerva told Thomas that she was cautiously hopeful about Mary Lou's chances of making it through this ordeal. She said that Mary Lou had shown a natural connection to the ancient guardian's information. Magically healed James and showed that she was much smarter than her years. This gave her the impression that she had the spiritual strength to handle the difficulties she would face in the caves. On the third night, the Ashcroft family saw and heard things that couldn't be explained logically. Even though it was still warm October, the temperature dropped a lot around the house, making a layer of ice on the windows. It wasn't the yellow flames that were dancing in the bush. Not the light from lanterns or candles, but a bluish, cold light that came from the trees. Sarah was sure she saw female silhouettes moving between the lights. These were see-through figures that looked like they were dancing or holding some kind of ritual. Around midnight on the third night, the songs came back loud enough to make the walls of the house shake. This time, though, the family was able to pick out a familiar voice among the old and strange ones. It was Mary Lou singing, along with the guardian spirits from long ago. Her young voice blended perfectly with the otherworldly sounds that echoed through the mountains. The sound both reassured and scared her. It showed that she was still alive, but it also made her feel like she had joined something much bigger and older than either of them could understand. Lizzie, the younger sister, was the first person to see Mary Lou come out of the woods at dawn on the fourth day. The person who walked slowly toward the house, on the other hand, was not. The same young woman who had left 3 days before. Mary Lou barely touched the leafy ground as she walked, making it look like she was floating. Her dark hair now had silver streaks that sparkled in the moonlight, and her green eyes had become so deep that they looked like they held hundreds of years of knowledge. The pendant, on the other hand, had changed the most. The thing that was once just an old jewel now gave off its own light and pulsed softly against Mary Lou's chest, like a second heart. It looked like the symbols carved into the silver had been given new life, as if they had been charged with energy. It was clear that Mary Lou had found more things in the caves. She was holding crystals with shapes that didn't make sense, scrolls that didn't look like paper, and small figures carved from a stone that neither of them could identify. When Mary Lou got to the door of the house, she stopped and looked at each person in her group. Family, with a phrase that mixed love for family with love for something much bigger and less personal. She spoke her first words in the old language she had learned. Later, she translated them into English and told them that she had been accepted by her former guardians and that she now had responsibilities that went far beyond her family and even her own life. When Marilou came back, it made the Ashcroft family both happy and scared. In the days after she gave birth, the young woman looked like she was trying to get used to being on the ground again after coming out of the mines. It was like she had been there for years instead of just 3 days. Although she moved around the house slowly, she would sometimes stop in the middle of something and stare blankly at empty spaces in the air, as if she were seeing or hearing something that no one else could. The changes Marilou was going through got stronger as the days went by. Her skin. She had gained a glowing complexion that seemed to softly glow in the dark, and her nails grew so fast that she had to cut them every day. What was even scarier was that she didn't seem to feel cold or hot the same way she used to. She walked barefoot through the frosty mornings without being bothered, and she wore light clothes even on the coldest October nights. Sarah noticed that Marilou had changed the way she ate. She rarely ate the family's regular food because she would rather spend hours. She spent hours in the woods gathering roots, wild fruits, and herbs that she then cooked in very complicated ways. Some of these plants Sarah was sure were poisonous for human consumption, but Marilou consumed them without any adverse effects. The young woman told the person who asked about her strange diet that her ancient guides had taught her how to get nutrition from sources that most people would think are harmful. During these first few weeks of getting used to life again, Marilou started to sort the things she had brought with her. From the rocks. She used the crystals, scrolls, and figurines in an empty small barn to make a kind of laboratory by arranging them in a way that only she knew. Thomas looked at these arrangements with interest and uneasiness. He noticed that the objects seemed to give off a soft energy that made his skin tingle when he got too close. The papers that Marilou brought back from the caves were the most interesting. They had works in many languages, and she recognized some of them. As different forms of the old language she knew how to speak, but some of them she couldn't even understand. Marilou said that these papers were records that had been kept by different generations of guardians. They were notes that had been made over hundreds of years about findings, experiments, and visions. To fully figure out what these scrolls say would take a lifetime. Marilou found out how big the cave network really was under the Ozark Mountains by looking at these old records. The system below ground. It went for hundreds of miles and linked places as far apart as Arkansas and Oklahoma. At different points in this huge network, other guardians had set up underground libraries called chambers of knowledge to store information that went back to the first people who lived in these lands. Even though Marilou had only been to a small part of this underworld, the old guardian spirits had shown her mental maps of the whole thing. The most shocking thing that came out was when Marilou said that she became one of many people picked to carry on the guardian's work. In other parts of the mountains, other young women were going through similar changes. They were awakening skills that had been dormant in their families. When Marilou woke up, it sent shockwaves through the spiritual network that linked all of these possible guards. This set off a chain of events that could not be stopped. As always, James was the most interested of the brothers. He asked Marilou if she could share some of what she had learned with the others, friends and family. Her answer was well thought out and full of warnings. A cooking recipe or a way to farm could not be passed down casually, neither could the knowledge of the ancient guardians. It was important to carefully test each person to see if they had the spiritual strength to handle this information without letting it change or destroy them. There was a demonstration by Marilou that left the whole family shocked to show this point. She got one of. The poisonous plants she had gathered in the forest were turned into a medicine using skills she had learned in the caves. This medicine instantly cured Sarah's long-term arthritis. Then James asked to learn the same trick, so Marilou showed him how to use the same plant in a slightly different way to make terrifying hallucinations that could last for weeks or even kill you in minutes. Because she knew so much about something dangerous, Mary started to feel responsible in ways that hurt. The family didn't fully understand. She started having regular nightmares in which she saw what would happen if she taught these techniques to people who weren't ready for them. In her visions, she saw whole cities being destroyed by people who took advantage of the ancient guardians' powers and turned healing tools into weapons that killed a lot of people. At the end of October 1865, Mary made a choice that would change the way she interacted with her family for good. She told everyone that she was going to die. Like any other person, she pretended that what she had seen and experienced in the caves had not happened. The ancient guardian spirits had made it clear to her what she could expect. She was supposed to build her own chamber of knowledge, a place where she could study and keep the knowledge she had gotten from her family. Thomas told Mary that he would help her build anything she needed on the family land, but she told him that she was going to live in the caves. She had found a perfect natural chamber on her 3-day trip, a wide. There was space with natural crystal formations that would make her powers stronger. The chamber was also linked to a source of clean water underground and air tunnels that would make sure there was fresh air, even deep underground. The thought of her daughter being moved underground to live permanently was almost too much for Sarah to bear. But Mary told her family that she wouldn't leave them. She would still visit them often, and it would only be a few miles to their new home. The most important thing about her being in the caves would protect the whole family because the powers she had learned would make a spiritual wall around the property that would keep them safe from any bad spirits that might be drawn to the artifacts. She had brought it from the depths. Beginning in the first week of November 1865, Mary moved to the caves. At the same time, the first frosts began to cover the Ozark Mountains with a crystalline mantle that seemed to reflect the supernatural change that had already happened. Taken over the girl. Thomas and James helped her move her most important belongings to the entrance of the cave she had chosen as her new home. This entrance was wider and easier to get to than the one she had used on her first 3-day journey. The room that Mary chose for her new home was truly impressive. The natural space was about 200 meters below the surface. It was made by water working on the limestone of the mountains over thousands of years, creating a hall with a high ceiling and decorations, with stalactites and stalactites that sparkled with minerals that came from the earth. A fisherman hole in the rock created a fountain of clear water in the middle of the room. The water formed a small lake in a circle that reflected candlelight like a perfect mirror. Mary carefully set up her new home, showing that she had a deep understanding of the energetic principles she had learned from the ancient guardians. He brought crystals back from the depths and put them in certain places around the chamber, making geometric patterns that let the earth's natural forces flow through and get stronger. The scrolls were carefully kept in dry niches carved into the stone walls. She had learned how to keep things safe during her transformation, so they wouldn't get wet. Within the first few weeks of living underground, Mary established habits that showed how her life had changed fundamentally from the normal course of human life. A few hours of sleep a night was all she got. She spent most of her time in deep meditation. Claims that this let her talk to the guardian spirits of the past and access memories that went back many generations. During these shifts, she spoke in languages that changed over time, as if she were hearing voices from different cultures and times. The Ashcroft family often went to see Mary and went down through the well-lit passageways she had set up so they could easily get to her room. While they were there, it was clear that the young woman kept changing in. Directions that didn't fit into any well-known category of human experience. She learned to see in total darkness because her eyes had adapted to being underground in a way that made it easy for her to find her way even in the darkest cave tunnels. During one of these visits with her family, Mary told them about new things she had learned from studying the old scrolls. She had figured out that the Guardians had other knowledge centers in different parts of the American continent. chambers like these, there were people living in the Appalachians, the Southwest deserts, and even on remote Great Lakes islands. Even though these centers were set up by different cultures and tribes, they all had the same basic knowledge about the forces that linked the physical world to the spiritual world. Marilou said that the ancient guardians had said that the knowledge they kept in their underground chambers would become very important during a time of great chaos in the world, the survival of all people. She had started having dreams that told her the time was almost up. Images he saw during his visions showed wars and disasters that were much worse than the wars and struggles his generation knew. Sarah was very upset by these predictions, so she asked her daughter if there was a way to stop the bad things she saw coming. Mary Lou replied that the guardian's job wasn't to stop change, but to keep the information that would help people get through the changes are unavoidable. The ancient guards knew from hundreds of years of experience that trying to control big events often made things worse than just letting the natural cycles of change happen. In December 1865, Mary Lou started having strange people come into her underground room. Other young women, some from as far away as Kentucky and Tennessee, started to show up in the Ozarks. Their dreams and visions told them to go to the place where Mary was. Lou had set up to live there. These young women, all between the ages of 15 and 20, talked about similar events to Mary Lou's. They found ancient items, talked to spiritual voices, and slowly changed in ways that made them feel disconnected from their families and communities. Thomas watched these people come in with growing worry. The family farm had become a gathering place for things he couldn't understand or manage. When the young women arrived, they were nice and friendly. But there was something in. His eyes had a depth and intensity that reminded him of the change he had seen in Mary Lou. They showed knowledge that was too dangerous for regular people to understand. Mary Lou greeted every new guest with a deep understanding that went beyond words. She could quickly tell which young women were ready to learn the most advanced secrets of the ancient guardians and which ones needed more time to get strong enough. Some of the guests were only there for a few days before going back home, taking with them only the most basic information that would help them on their own transformational paths. Others, on the other hand, showed signs of being able to become full guardians, and Marilou began to lead them through the same initiation steps she had gone through. These young women went down into the cave's deepest levels, where they had their own times of being alone and changing. Not everyone made it through the process unscathed. Some came back with superpowers, but others had been through things that changed them permanently in ways that their families found hard to accept. The Ashcroft family was very worried about the complicated relationships that were forming among the growing group of guardians-to-be. Seeing how devoted the other young women seemed to Mary Lou, Sarah started to worry that her daughter might have become the leader of some kind of group. Her worries grew as she watched them. Thomas found it hard to balance his love for his father with his love for his wife, with the rising worry that his daughter had changed into something very different from a normal person. The hard winter of 1865 caused big changes in the mountains of the Ozarks that went beyond the weather. As the number of young women changed by the former guardians grew, they started to get unwanted attention from nearby towns, where tales of supernatural activity spread like wildfire through a dry forest. In Springfield, the closest town, business people and farmers started telling each other stories. Strange mountain lights, songs that echoed through the valleys at night, and young people who vanished from their homes and came back weeks later, completely changed. The pastor of Springfield Baptist Church, the Reverend Cornelius Whitmore, was the first church leader to speak out about his worries about what was happening in the mountains. During his Sunday sermons, he started to warn his audience about how bad it would be for the area if pagan practices spread. Whitmore, who is 53 years old, known for his heated speeches, He said that the things going on in the cave were signs from Satan that threatened the souls of all the Christians in the Ozarks. Some of the most powerful men in Springfield came up to Thomas Ashcroft and asked him directly about his daughter. This put him in a tough spot. Samuel Fletcher, who owned a lot of stock, and Jeremiah Morrison, who owned the biggest warehouse in the city, both wanted to know what was going on the lands of Ashcroft. Someone told them about strange practices that young women did, and some families in the area started to think that Mary Lou was to blame for their daughter's growing disobedience. Thomas tried to calm everyone down at Morrison's warehouse by saying that his daughter wasn't making trouble for anyone and that she was just learning about plant medicine that could help sick people. But Morrison and Fletcher didn't care about small details, giving reasons. A group of worried citizens got together and ordered that something be done right away to stop what was going on in the caves before things got out of hand. Because she could see things supernaturally, Mary Lou knew that the hostility was rising. While she was meditating, she heard warnings from the old guardians that she needed to be careful of the kinds of attacks that had destroyed whole groups of wise women in the past. He heard stories from the dead about other times and places where people had been very violent toward people who knew things that most people thought were dangerous. To keep her growing community safe, Mary Lou put in place security measures that showed how smart she was at planning and how magical she was. She set up a system of spirit sentinels around the caves using specially made crystals that would let her know when someone with bad plans was coming near. She also taught the young guardians were practicing energy camouflage skills that made it hard for outsiders to find the cave openings. Rebecca Hamilton, a 16-year-old from Springfield's most famous family, went missing during a snow in January 1866, which made things worse. Her parents, Jonathan and Margaret Hamilton, who owned the local bank, quickly said that Mary Lou was to blame for their daughter going missing. They said Rebecca had been seen talking to one of the young people who often went to the caves, and it was clear that she had been swayed by claims of magical powers. Rebecca's parents thought the story of her absence was simpler than it really was. The young woman had started seeing things on her own a few weeks before she left Springfield. She has vivid dreams about old women calling her to the mountains. When she finally listened to these voices, she went straight to the caves where Mary Lou had set up her community, led by a strength she could feel inside. Don't try to explain or fight it. Mary Lou carefully looked over Rebecca the same way she looked over all the other young women who came to the caves. She quickly realized that Rebecca had a lot of promise to be a good guardian, but she also knew that the young woman had deep family issues that would make it harder for her to change. Rebecca Hamilton's family put a lot of pressure on her to follow strict social norms, which stifled her natural spirituality in ways that led to important psychological wounds. Mary Lou had to use more advanced methods to help Rebecca heal and change than she had with other candidates. She led the young woman through complicated rites for 3 weeks. During these rituals, she talked to the spirits of her former guardians and faced her fears and the limits that her strict upbringing had added to her life. After going through these things, Rebecca became a truly Durson person. The beginning of violent groups were the start of the most dangerous time in the history of the community of guards that Mary Lou had set up in the Ozark Mountains. In February 1866, armed men started walking the roads that led to the remote lands in the area and questioning any travelers about their plans and where they were going. Samuel Fletcher took on the unofficial command of these groups and led nighttime searches in the forest for the entrances to the caves where the mysterious practices were done by young women who had changed. As the community became more hostile, Thomas Ashcroft found himself in a more dangerous situation. He was treated suspiciously and coldly by neighbors who had been friends for decades. They openly asked him why he let his property be used as a base for activities they thought were dangerous for the whole region. There was a lot of tension when Thomas went to Morrison's warehouse and was met by a group of more than 20 men told him to get Mary Lou and her people off their land right away. When Ezekiel Barnes, the county sheriff, showed up at the Ashcroft family's house with a search warrant from a local judge, things got worse for them. Barnes, a 45-year-old guy who was known for not getting involved in community disputes, told Thomas that he had heard several complaints about illegal activities happening in the caves. He wasn't sure about the witchcraft claims himself, but he was. The government is legally required to look into claims that young girls were being held against their will and in unsafe circumstances. Mary Lou knew the police were coming long before they got to the caves because they used magical spying techniques to let her know. She had spent weeks getting her community ready for this to happen, by teaching the young guards how to hide in a way that made it hard for strangers to find their way through the cave's complicated tunnels. When Sheriff Barnes and his staff, when they finally found one of the main entrances, they saw what looked like empty rooms that hadn't been used in a while. The police's useless search made vigilante groups even more angry, because they saw the lack of evidence as proof that Marilou and her followers really did have supernatural powers. Samuel Fletcher said that existing police methods weren't enough to handle threats that went beyond natural laws, so he started to plan more aggressive missions. That didn't depend on official law permissions. In March 1866, things got really bad when Fletcher led a group of vigilantes who attacked Catherine Morrison, a young woman who was the niece of the warehouse owner and had been seen going toward the mountains early in the morning. Catherine had started having dreams that were like those of other young women in the area. She followed her gut and went to the cave so Mary Lou could help her figure out what her strange experiences mean. The attack on Catherine was planned and very violent. The vigilantes surrounded her in a clearing halfway between Springfield and the caves and told her she was under the control of Satan and demanded to know where Mary Lou's hiding places were. When Catherine refused to give them information, saying that she honestly didn't know how to get into the caves through the secret openings, the men beat her up to get her to admit that she had been involved in the crime. Practices that they thought were evil. Mary Lou knew right away that Catherine was in pain because she had a spiritual link with all the young women in the area who had the potential to be guardians. She came out of the caves with 6 of the most experienced guards. They got to the clearing where Catherine was being tortured just in time to see the vigilantes hurt the young woman permanently. Exactly what the men saw when Mary Lou and her friends. Whatever showed up in the forest broke all logic. The 7 women moved so smoothly together that it looked like they were directed by a single mind. They spoke in unison in an old tongue that made the air around them vibrate with energy that could be felt. Their eyes had a light inside them that seemed to come from the stars. Samuel Fletcher and his men, who had been in war and were used to violence, were frozen with a fear that was deeper than anything they had seen on the battlefield. Catherine saw Mary Lou coming toward her. She moved in a way that looked more like floating than walking. And the vigilante's wounds started to heal when she touched the young girl's wound. Broken bones healed, cuts healed, and bruises went away like they were never there. Even the most skeptical men in the crowd couldn't deny that they were seeing something that went beyond what they knew about natural laws. The healing power show was so complete and quick. She didn't just get better, though. "Hi, Catherine." She spoke to Samuel Fletcher and his friends, and as she did, her voice echoed with the voices of all the guards who had been mistreated and killed over the years. She told them that their actions were based on fear and ignorance, which had destroyed many communities of wise women in the past. They had to decide whether to repeat the mistakes of the past or learn how to live with knowledge that was beyond their limited understanding. Fletcher's answer was, showing how people thought that led to the oppression in the first place. He said that he would rather get rid of all supernatural forces in the area than constantly worry that his children and wives might be harmed by forces that no one could control. His words showed the real reason for community hostility. Men are afraid of losing control over the women in their families to forces they don't understand or can't control. What did Mary Lou hear? Fletcher's words with a sadness that seemed to come from hundreds of years of battles just like this one. She said that the ancient guardians had never wanted to rule or corrupt anyone. Their only goal was to keep knowledge alive so that everyone could benefit. However, she also understood that Fletcher's fear was real, and that it was caused by cultural norms that could not be changed by reason or kindness. When they fought in the open, it was too late to go back. How Mary Lou is connected to the people of Springfield. In the days after Catherine Morrison was miraculously saved, news of the Guardians' supernatural abilities spread like wildfire across the area. Samuel Fletcher and his men were deeply disturbed by what they saw. When they got back to the city, they told stories that were either scary or impossible, depending on how brave they were to say what had really happened that night in the woods. Reverend Whitmore explained what these meant. Things that happened as proof of his worst fears about how evil mountain pastimes were. In his sermons, he said that Mary Lou was a slave to Satan, who had given up her soul for powers that she used to hurt harmless teens and go against God's natural order. He told the people in his church to start a holy crusade to get rid of the evil in the Ozarks before it spread to other parts of Missouri, and even further. Thomas Ashcroft watched these events with increasing hopelessness. That made him think he might lose his mind. No matter how scared he was about her magical change, he loved his daughter very much. But he also knew that the situation had gotten so bad that it was no longer possible to solve it peacefully. He couldn't sleep for long periods of time because he kept thinking about the terrible chance that his family would have to leave the home they had worked so hard on for 8 years. As Sarah tried to find peace between her motherly love and her own inner fears, with more and more proof that Mary Lou had changed into something very different from a normal human daughter. Whenever she went to the caves, she saw Mary Lou deal with the other guardians with a level of power and wisdom that seemed way beyond her 18 years. When Sarah looked into her daughter's eyes, she would sometimes see depth that seemed to hold memories of lives that went far beyond the limits of a single human life. For her part, Mary Lou was deeply aware of her family was in pain because of how she had changed. She got advice from the old guardians about how to make choices that would protect her growing community and the people she loved when she was meditating deeply. The spirits showed him visions of possible futures in which community hatred turned into genocide, killing everyone connected to the guardians. It was April 1866 when Mary Lou made a choice that would change the course of events in Archangelsk. She called a meeting of all the guardians she was in charge of, including Rebecca Hamilton and Catherine Morrison, to talk about a plan that the ghosts of the past guardians had been whispering to her for weeks. The plan called for leaving the Ozark Caves for a while and moving the community to more remote places where they could keep working without worrying about the families they had left behind. When Mary Lou made her offer, what the other guards thought was mixed. Some people, especially those who had been completely rejected by their families, saw migration as a way to start a new life without being limited by groups that would never be able to accept how they had changed. Others, on the other hand, didn't want to give up the family ties they still valued, even if those ties had grown tense and difficult. Rebecca Hamilton spoke out against the transfer plan more than anyone else. Even though she had changed a lot, and her parents didn't like it, she still had dreams that she could find a way to combine her new life with her old life in Springfield. She said that running away from danger would only make people more sure that what she was doing was bad, while staying and showing how her powers could help people could help her gain respect over time. Mary Lou listened to all the points with the usual calmness, but she had already made up her mind. Been made based on information that went beyond the narrow views of any one person. Over many years, the ancient guards had been in similar situations, and their combined knowledge showed that trying to force acceptance from groups that didn't want it always ended in tragedy. The knowledge of many generations of women who have been mistreated led to one result. To stay alive, you had to be able to tell when it was better to strategically retreat than to directly face the enemy. In the first few weeks of April, Marilou started making plans for the move. She planned the careful transport of the cave's most important artifacts, packing crystals, scrolls, and figurines into specially made containers that would protect their energetic integrity during long journeys, even though she knew that the choice would cause her family more pain. Some of the most experienced guards were sent out as scouts to find good caves in Colorado and Montana's remote areas, where groups of women who had changed could settle down without drawing unnecessary attention to themselves. There were people Samuel Fletcher kept in touch with on the Ashcroft estate who told him about the plans to leave. Fletcher saw the planned migration as proof that his methods of scaring people were working, but he also thought that letting the Guardians leave would mean they would come back with even stronger abilities and more evil plans. He started planning the last trip that would catch Mary, Lou, and her followers before they could say goodbye to the Ozark Mountains for good. Thomas got unconfirmed word about Fletcher's plans from people he knew in Springfield, who still felt sorry for the Ashcroft family. During a tense talk with his daughter, he begged her to hurry up with getting ready to leave, telling her that a coordinated attack was coming soon and could be deadly. Mary Lou thanked her dad for the information, but told him she already knew everything. Her own magical ways to keep an eye on Fletcher's plans. In May 1866, Mary Lou and her family said goodbye on a cold morning when the morning mist still hung over the Ozark Hills like a ghostly cloak. Sarah desperately held her daughter in her arms, even though she knew that they might not be able to be together forever. While James and Elizabeth watched the scene, Thomas stayed quiet and fought back tears that could have shown how sad he was, as they slowly came to terms with the fact that their family would never be the same again. Mary Lou and her guardians left the Ozarks early in the morning on May 6, 1866, when the darkness before dawn still provided cover for actions that had to be hidden from the suspicious eyes of Springfield. The 13 young women who decided to go with Mary Lou on her journey moved through the forest with an uncanny sense of coordination, following paths that only they could see. Family knowledge that meant they didn't need regular maps or compasses. When Samuel Fletcher and his guardsmen got to the caves 3 hours after the Guardians left, they found only empty rooms that were still vibrating with the energy of decades of intense spiritual activity. The diamonds that were on the walls were taken down. The old scrolls were no longer there. Even the signs that people had lived there seemed to have been erased by forces that went beyond regular ways of cleaning. Fletcher told his men to look through every tunnel and gap, but when they went inside, the caves were empty and quiet, as if they had never held the scary secrets that had scared the whole town. Thomas Ashcroft often looked at the fruitless pursuit of his land and felt both relieved and deeply sad. A part of him was glad to know that Mary Lou had gotten away safely from the rising hostility that was threatening to kill anyone connected to the supernatural things going on in the mountains. But another part of his fatherly heart was, he was heartbroken because he knew he would probably never see his daughter again. He had raised her with so much love and hope. The changes Mary Lou made were so complete that she now belonged to a world that was beyond what normal people can experience. After the Guardian left, Springfield slowly got back to a normal life over the next few weeks. The town had been permanently changed, though, by the strange events it had seen. People whose daughters had died in supernatural. Transformation had a hard time dealing with events that made them question everything they thought they knew about reality. Some of these families slowly came to realize that their girls had been called to do things that went beyond what was expected of them by society, while others clung to the relief of having the negative influences taken out of their lives. Reverend Whitmore said that the Guardian's departure was a win for Christianity over evil forces, but his sermons of victory could not save the people. He tried very hard to hide how uneasy he was about the real powers he had seen. In his quiet times of prayer, he struggled with doubts that could have shaken his basic beliefs about what is good and bad. He couldn't tell the difference between the magical healings he saw Marilou do and the miracles described in the Bible. This made him wonder if he had really been fighting evil forces or just manifestations of divine powers that his limited theology couldn't explain. Becky Hamilton. After Marilou left, she went back to live with her parents, but the reunion was only on the surface. She remembered everything she learned when she changed, but she had learned to be very careful about showing off her magical abilities. Over the next few years, she would quietly help sick people in Springfield by using her healing powers, always in quiet ways that wouldn't draw attention to herself. Her life was a constant struggle to find balance between her new nature and the social norms of a group that would never fully accept her as she was. There were similar problems for Catherine Morrison, but she picked a different way to deal with them. She kept up a secret correspondence with Mary Lou for many years, getting advice on how to grow her powers without getting in trouble. Catherine eventually left Springfield to marry a farmer in a faraway part of Kansas. There, she became known as a healer who used herbs to help people in rural areas that were open to traditional information about natural medicine more. Mary Lou and her followers set up their new community in the remote Colorado mountains. The high-altitude caves gave them complete privacy to continue their research into ancient knowledge. Since then, the Ozarks have heard from time to time about a mysterious group of wise women living in the western mountains and helping travelers who are strong enough to ask for their help. These stories were never. Even though it wasn't officially proven, stories about guardians who kept ancient knowledge alive in a world where people wanted to forget about the magic that still lived in America's wild places continued in the region's folklore. The Ashcroft family stayed on their Ozarks estate for another 15 years, holding on to the land where their daughter had found her amazing fate. Thomas never told anyone in public about what he saw, but on lonely nights he would walk to the empty caves, maybe hoping to hear echoes of the chants that filled those tunnels with sounds that couldn't be put together. Sarah slowly came to realize that she had not only given birth to a daughter, but also to a knowledge keeper whose duties went far beyond the limits of a human life. James remembered the miraculous healing that Mary Lou had done on his leg as a child. These memories drove him to become a doctor and make him one of the most recognized doctors in the area. He could never do it again. He didn't believe in his sister's supernatural abilities, but he was very open to non-traditional healing ways because he knew how limited conventional medicine was. Elizabeth wrote in great detail in her diaries about her family history. These diaries became the only accurate written record of the amazing events that happened in the Ozark Mountains in the winter of 1865. The caves of the Ozarks are still silent after more than 150 years. But sometimes explorers report strange. In the deepest parts of the limestone caves, scientists have found crystals with shapes that can't be explained by science. Symbols carved into stone walls that don't belong to any known culture, and rooms where the air still vibrates with energies that can't be explained by science. Others think that the old guardians may still have knowledge that hasn't been found yet because it is hidden in places that only wise people could find. One of the scariest secrets in American history is still the case of Mary Lou Ashcroft. History is a warning that there are forces in the world that are bigger than what we can understand. His story makes us think about what we think are the limits of what is possible, and whether there is lost knowledge ready to be found again by people who are brave enough to look beyond what is normally thought to be possible. If this trip through the dark secrets of the Ozark Mountains has made you want to learn more about other unsolved riddles in the United States history, make sure you follow our channel to make sure you don't miss any of our studies. If Mary Lou's story didn't answer all of your questions, watch this video and let us know what other scary cases you'd like us to look into in future shows. After this trip through the past, there will be no more.